Hey everybody, today we're going to walk through Gigasheet's new Super Timeline capability. We think this is a really handy tool if you work in IT operations or cybersecurity incident response, or really any job where you need to compile lots of information along a time series axis. So if you've got lots of disparate logs or other artifacts like extracts from network firewalls or local desktop machines, and you need to compile all this information onto a single timeline, Super Timeline can help. Now, if you'd like to access this and try it out for yourself, just drop us an email at support@gigasheet.com and we can get you set up with it. And of course, if you haven't already, go to gigasheet.com and create a free account. Let's check it out. We'll start out here in the library, and I'll just drag and drop a zip file onto my file list, and you'll see that it's this Lone Wolf 2018 CAPE output. You don't need to use a zip file, and you certainly don't need to use CAPE, but for this example, I was able to find a nice bundle of tons of files here that would be good for demonstration purposes. So you can see here that Gigasheet is processing each file and parsing it. And it'll take a few minutes to do this. I'll open a few files along the way and just sort of explore them. You can see this console.txt file, for example. And these are just normal Gigasheet experience like you may have used before. So just a table with the data. In this case, lots of timestamps, things like that. So these are what our artifacts look like. You can also use files ad hoc. They don't have to all be part of the same bundle like this CAPE extract. You could just grab, random EVTX files or logs off the network, server logs that you want to combine with this. Really, whatever artifacts you have for your investigation, the one thing you do want is to make sure they're kind of around the same period in time, which is why this makes for a nice demo here. So I'll let this run for a couple minutes and let it parse through this data, and then I'll show you how to use the Super Timeline capability in Gigasheet. Okay, now we can see all these files have been loaded into Gigasheet. We had one that had an error, and we can pretty easily just remove that here. I'm not sure what went wrong with that file. Might need to take a closer look at why it didn't parse. Sometimes there are headers or other information that's added that causes an issue. So here's the data that we've extracted from our zip file and this CAPE output. And what I'll do is just select a handful of these. This is just for demonstration purposes. I am not an investigator or incident responder, so I'm just going to pull together some random files for this walkthrough. So I'll pick a few of these output files. You'll see here that we're able to pull them together into a forensic timeline. One requirement of this is that whatever artifact you pull in, it does need a date timestamp, and you'll see why here in the next step. So I've picked a handful of files. You could pick as many as you want, really. Just for sake of brevity, I'm picking this random amount. I'll give it a meaningful name and click Next. Here you can see for each of these files, Gigasheet has automatically selected the first date time stamp that it found. If you think about it looking across the columns after it's been parsed, that's what Gigasheet picks. But if there are multiple date timestamps available, you can select which one you'd like to use for your timeline. And you can also apply an offset. So if these happen to come from different time zones, for example. In this case, this all came from the same time zone, so I'm not going to go through and do that. But if you had systems in different time zones, this is helpful. The next step is selecting a description. So if you think about your timeline, what do you want to display? Some descriptive text in this sheet that we're going to build this timeline. And you can pick multiple fields. So you can see here I'm picking some other description fields here that would just give me more information and remind me kind of like what I'm looking at and why this is interesting. And you can see all the string fields that are available in each of these files can be selected here for the message column. So I'll pick a few different descriptive text strings to include, and then I will build the timeline. So next, a timeline view will populate here and display on the screen. You can see the total number of events here at the bottom. You can page through these or jump to a different section of time within this. Pretty basic paging through data here. You'll also notice this first column on the left is the date time column, and that we have a date time that starts in 1970. That's because in this particular file there were blanks or null values for the date timestamp. As I mentioned before, you want to make sure you have good timestamps on your artifacts so that you can use it effectively in this timeline. In this case, we know this incident occurred sometime in 2018, so I'll limit my time window to that point in time. You'll see the message column. These are where the descriptions appear that I selected. And you can see all the files. We give them different colors here on the right. I can quickly toggle on and off different files. If I just wanted to zoom and look at a subset of files, you can see here some different things occurred and overlapped in time. You can tell by the coloring on the left. If you click on any row, you can get the full details from the log or the artifact, in this case, so that you can use the message column just as kind of like a title or header description. I'll show you how you can add these to a report. Yep, so this is the basics of it. You can also jump out to any of these files. Let's say I wanted to inspect this particular file more carefully on its own. And what I've done is pop this out to its own sheet. This is kind of the typical GigaSheet experience. You can do all the grouping, filtering, subgroups, stuff like that here. Again, this is just on this particular file, so we've sort of zoomed in to this particular artifact and are just inspecting that. So here I can see different classes, different software, registry stuff it looks like maybe, and I can easily filter this stuff as usual, or exclude certain things like that. So you can prep these files before you build your timeline by using filters, but in this case, I just kind of took everything and took the kitchen sink approach where we throw everything in. So I'll jump back to the timeline now and want to show you a few other capabilities. We have this notes capability. So when you find something interesting or maybe you want to annotate it, you can include notes here. These also get included in the final report, as I'll show you later. It's optional. You don't need to do it. You can also use flags for things that you maybe want to come back to or that you know are problematic, just as sort of like bookmarks in the file. We have a search capability. There's also regex support here. So I'll just search for like admin, for example. And all of these have admin somewhere in that row, if you want to think of it from that extract. So admin doesn't need to be in the message field. It could be somewhere else on that row. Using this checkbox for in report, I can start to collect rows or events that occurred that are of specific interest. And you can kind of use these toggles on the right to get to the information that you're most interested in. Here, I'll just select a few different events that I think are perhaps meaningful that I want to include in my kind of final export of this data. Here, by clicking on the stopwatch icon, I'm jumping into a feature we call Time Wrinkle. Basically, you'll notice at the top here, what it's done is zoomed to a 10-minute period before and after the event. So when you click the stopwatch, basically what that does is it adjusts your time settings at the top to specifically that window of time. When you're ready to build a report, you simply click the Build Report button and you get this summary. It tells you how many files, the number of events, and the time span of this particular incident. You can export the data as a CSV or doc. You can even copy it as markdown text. If you had added notes on the right, they would be included here. That's it. This is a basic capability using GigaSheet's Super Timeline. Thanks.